Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Interior Ecology Symposium. I have the pleasure to introduce today one member from the Postnatural studies, Gabriel Alonso. Before I will let him talk, I would like first to present him briefly. Gabriel Alonso is a visual artist that has been studied in Madrid, but also Berlin and New York. In his work, he investigates contemporary relationship between aesthetic, science, and post-nature for different formats such as installation, sculpture, photography, or video. His latest project explores post-romantic assemblies of the natural, activating a change of perspective regarding the relationship between archaeology, geology, and human culture. Together with other members, Gabriel founded the Institute for Postnatural Studies in 2020. The studio is based in Madrid. The Institute for Postnatural Studies is conceived as a platform for critical thinking, a network that brings together artists and researchers concerned about the issue of the global ecological crisis through experimental format of exchange. From a multidisciplinary approach, the Institute developed long-term researches focused on issues such as ecology, coexistence, politics, and territories. These lines of investigation take different shape on formats, including seminar, exhibition, and residencies as a space for academic and artistic experimentation. Today, he will talk about the skin of the Sensuous. In their work, the Institute for Postnatural Studies are talking a lot about how to expand contemporary practice in the artistic, but also in the pedagogical panorama. They approach a more horizontal through the seminar. The traditional roles in education are reverted, giving shape and space for collective thinking. In parallel, the research-based artistic production is creating a shared knowledge concerned with the ecological moments we are immersed in. I will let you the floor now, and a very welcome to you, Gabriel Alonso.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Thank you everyone for inviting us. Sometimes I will be speaking in plural as I feel like part of this collective platform called the Institute. I was going to do an introduction, but I think that was a beautiful introduction already, so no much more to say. Some of the things that I'm going to share today will resonate with ideas and concepts that you've been seeing with Pablo and Mateo, who run here project-based workshop with you all, and I'm happy to take like the next step and share with you some ideas that we've been thinking, kind of provocations that I want to share with you so that we can have a discussion afterwards around some idealizations of nature, but also around dichotomies of the interior and the exterior that I think you're working around. So I propose to call this kind of provocative talk the skins of the Sensuous, because we believe it is through veils, skins and membranes, but also borders and containment strategies that we are establishing relationships of closeness or division between living beings, substances and matters within the world. So I will propose today a kind of multi-scalar journey, a genealogy of epidermic strategies that might unfold at the end, an ecology of touch, of symbiosis and coexistence that abandons our anthropocentric understanding of exchange. So from the Institute, we understand post-nature as a kind of invitation to defy rigid categorizations. So we explore matters and stories that blur boundaries between the cultural, the natural, and the artificial. We believe that the idea of a pacified nature, that backdrop or neutral scene in which human takes place, is no longer valid. There are things happening in contemporaneity, things related to our own lives, but especially to the lives of other living beings that are non-humans, that make us reflect that the idea of a pacified nature, no, that happy nature, that abstract framework in which humans used to live, is no longer useful to continue thinking about us, and specifically to continue thinking about the others. So we understand post-nature as a kind of a space for debate, a space where we want to negotiate and discuss with alterity, with the other, with those things that are not like us, but that also constitute us. So we believe in a constitution that invites us to think in the ecological as a parliament between humans and non-humans, between matters and entities, which deserve a more cosmopolitical understanding. We believe in nature or post-nature as a political subject, and I am convinced that art, design, and architecture are privileged places to debate these kind of questions, as they have always been shaping our relation with the environment. So surely, if I ask you all to close your eyes and name the word nature with capital letters, we will all generate a similar image in our minds. An image into which history of recent culture has undoubtedly contributed, starting with the Renaissance and especially shaped during Romanticism. For us, this is problematic. In most cases, an image of a pristine and beautiful landscape comes to our minds, a green forest or a deep blue ocean. But have you ever asked yourselves, where does that image come from? Today's complex relationship with the environment is challenging us. It requires new modes of thought and action, of seeing and hearing and imagining. So post-nature becomes an invitation to cultivate new ecological alternatives in the mixtures of matters and cultures, of science and fictions, of myths and technologies. So we believe in post-nature as a tool to rethink such relationships with the world around us. It is a way to unfold a responsibility and awareness amidst the enormous ecological crisis that is affecting every living being today. So from our Western perspective, the natural is related to a kind of sublime, flat, and for us sometimes paralyzing image that compares nature with a kind of paradise. But as we will see today, also the walls, the extinctions, and different ontological spaces, the human and non-human, the natural and the artificial, separate us from the possibility of thinking beyond our anthropocentric perspectives, of understanding the necessities to feel, sense, and explore more than human ecologies. Nature has been shaped as a limit, as a border that separates an inside and an outside, creating a false opposition that we need to dismantle. For today, I will propose you to join me in a non-linear journey through some examples that I will call postnatural genealogies, analyzing architectures, technologies, and devices that have separated us from the world. We will deepen into non-human ways of affecting senses rather than the intellect, revealing the subtle dependence of multispecies cognition on the natural environment, and embracing new technologies and cyborg futures. From the apocalyptic landscapes of human violence over the territories in construct to the technologies that pursue the materialization of heaven on earth, we will see some contradictions of how modernity has categorized reality. And to do so, we will navigate through, without order or hierarchies, places, documents, and historical moments. Such non-linear understanding of events, matters, and entities takes us to what we call an archaeology, a multi-scalar and multi-temporal approach based on a radical skepticism towards two central ideas, the linearity of time and anthropocentrism, which we believe will be very useful to dismantle the borders that have separated us from the world and to understand history as a construction, as an agglomerate always based on perspectives and interests. So this archaeological approach aims to reconstruct a non-linear genealogy, understanding the natural, artificial, and the human-non-human relations as aggregations that include also the political, economic, ethical, and aesthetical strata implicit in every cultural and artistic process. So let's start this journey in a moment that for us, everything collapsed. It is now 1945, July 16th, and we are in the Trinity test site in New Mexico. This is what we would see 16 milliseconds after the first detonation of a nuclear weapon, carried out at Jornada del Muerto, a desert near the city of Socorro in New Mexico. So right after this detonation, a strange light green glass was formed, a new mineral called trinitite, as the explosion melted the sun to a higher temperature than the sun's surface. The new radioactive matter covered the land with a strange substance unknown and totally foreign to the Earth's composition until now. This is the first man-made rock, a postnatural matter that melted the sun into a complex agglomerate where the limits between human, non-human, technological, and geological are blurred. The Earth's sphere will contain from then on a thin layer of radioactive material in its crust, a deposition that makes visible a decisive geological moment, a term ubiquitous in the contemporary ecological debate, the Anthropocene. That is, humans from then on become a mineralogical force, and some of the materials that we consider artificial will become part of a chemical and biological composition of geological strata. So the approach to the complex, unstable, delocalized, and viscous mixture that will henceforth shape contemporary matter requires for us an ontological transformation around the concepts of materiality, of geology, and of nature itself, and can change our look on the territory, reconfiguring relationship with geopolitics, economy, and technology. But if this is the material shift derived from the violent explosion, let's look at its invisible consequences. So when the atomic bomb was tested near Alamogordo, the scientists at Los Alamos were the first humans to witness the power of a nuclear weapon. During the detonation, numerous soldiers and their families watched the event looking down at ground zero through that tinted glass, observing the growth of a large cloud as the light from the blast illuminated the skies. Dressed like any other day, they celebrated the event as the final weapon and key to the end of the World War II had been a success. It is both fascinating and scary to witness how their skins were exposed to such toxic and dangerous matters. If the detonation marked a turning point in the history of modernity, causing this technological and military transformation that helped redraw the political map of the world, it also caused a cultural and ontological shift around the binary dualisms on which these technologies were built, destabilizing the notion of a world divided into opposites. There is no more natural versus artificial, but maybe there's no more internal versus external. There is no more safe against toxic. So we have to redesign non-hierarchical definitions of our interventions in the territory. After the detonation and during these months, the whole area was spotted with small architectures linked to the nuclear experiments. Observation bunkers, timing control shelters, photography stations and towers, they were conforming a constellation of structures and devices. These apocalyptic architectures would facilitate observation through radiation measurements and photographic documentation during the explosions. The construction conditions for these buildings and structures were totally disrupted by the artifice of the nuclear bomb. Nuclear architectures designed and erected to facilitate experiments with the recently discovered uranium and plutonium had to respond to yet unknown hazardous materials and conditions. So with their thick concrete walls, the geometric arrangement, small holes and semi-buried surfaces, they were shaping a new landscape in which toxicity, high temperatures and radiation demanded extreme design strategies. Humans were again separating themselves from a new poison atmosphere. And this is one of the only one of the many examples of the constant division between living beings, between substances and matters within the world that the cultures of the Capitalocene and the Anthropocene have created. We from the Institute are a bit critical with the idea of the Anthropocene and believe that there are many other terminologies that are maybe more important to think about human action and our responsibility within the world. So we've been looking around the notion of Capitalocene, but also the idea of the Anthropocene that we can discuss later by Jussi Parikka, where he explores the idea of how technology and our obscenities regarding the use of technological devices is really what is shaping a new kind of geological moment. But for us, in the context of new radioactive postnatural matter such as nuclear waste, these fixed and binary categories such as visible and invisible also will make us think and will invite us to change our perspective in how the containers and the limits of modernity are definitely losing their capacity to contain. When I was studying this kind of architectures, I encountered these two beautiful drawings that are drawn by hand by two militaries from the Oppenheimer division. And they are remembers drawn 1 week after the detonation of the shape of the clouds. So for me, these lines that are a kind of desperate attempt to contain what the air that was toxic from the air that is safe is like a kind of last moment of containment, of separation between two atmospheres that will mix in a complex postnatural environment. And we think that it is precisely blurring these limits that we should definitely find ways to incorporate new ecological practices from architecture, from philosophy, from art, and from design. So in his book, Terror from the Air, philosopher Peter Sloterdijk argues that it is precisely in the air, in the invisible medium that we breathe and share with other entities, in which the complexity of the ecological is negotiated. He will point to the massive use of chlorine gas by the German army against French-Canadian infantry in the Battle of Ypres as the inaugural moment of the atmo-terrorist model, which meant the enlargement of the war scenario and the displacement of the battlefield to the environmental setting. What he was saying is that from that moment on, violence goes from confronting body-to-body battle to confronting a battle on our environments. Architecture, design, from then on will have to understand its strategies, its membranes, and its walls as a defense from the medium in which we live. From this ascent on, he develops a whole climatological knowledge of the adversary's living conditions in order to asphyxiate it with gases and saturate the atmosphere with radiation and toxicity. But what are the consequences of such violent poisoning of our atmospheres? How does this technological understanding of the air affect our relation with the non-human? As I said at the beginning, we believe that it is by analyzing the violent technologies that have shaped our cultures that we can begin to understand the necessities of a new environmental media that talks about the shared milieu with the more than human living beings. By contaminating the atmosphere, the body is delocalized. The air becomes poisoned in an environment that unfolds being no longer only human. And it is precisely in such complex postnatural condition that a possible coexistence demands us to abandon our anthropocentric understanding of exchange. The air that we breathe, the conditions of our violent actions and technologies raise the need to acclimatize a space against poisonous conditions. Architecture, designed through its walls, veils, skins, membranes, and masks, is now condemned to attend such complex instability, from an exterior that is poisoned and an interior, bodies that are not only human. So when we look at these masks, we can see how beings are performing a specific task within the technology of war, and therefore have to be protected through specific devices designed to control the inhalation of toxic gases. There is no sensibility, there is no empathy, there is just instrumentalization and violence. It should be clear by now that we have to take responsibility on the ways we relate with other species, which are condemned to be immersed in our toxic and apocalyptic environments. So from the Institute, we are very interested in understanding these contradictions of such coexistences in order to think in possible ways of healing such acts. So the typologies of these masks would be almost like an archive of postnatural animal protections that have been immersed in such conflicts, bodies being classified, utilized within different hierarchies. And sadly, design still stays at the service of the very anthropocentric and cruel perspective. In the shift from an architecture of the metric to an architecture of the atmospheric, human beings poison the very environment they inhabit. We have moved from the atmoterrorism war to an ecoterrorism reality. New mythologies derive from this type of violence against the territory and against other bodies, creating a new landscape in ruins that is the one that we will have to inhabit. It is as if, through the devastation of nature, we condemn ourselves and the one living with us to a kind of zombie state in a society that takes the capacity to annihilate itself. The Anthropocene, unfortunately, has a lot to do with this, of the possibility of causing the disappearance of the species. And for us, it is precisely again in such complex relation that we should think on the future of our projects, of our ways that we can redeem some of the most terrific ecocides against forests, non-human animals, and all the living species that unfortunately share the planet with us. So it seems at this point quite clear that the complexities of today's environmental catastrophes are distancing us from that idea of the utopia, turning the Garden of Eden into a postnatural ecosystem of fragile interactions. But still, this idealized image that has survived to the ecocides of modernity, in Western tradition, rationalism and enlightenment are dealing with the problem of nature as a key idea that separates us from the mystical religious image. And it understands the objective science as a premise that by observing and obeying nature, its mastery is possible. Humanist and modernist thinking puts into operation a mechanistic and instrumental vision of nature when a utopian project is realized. The image of nature has been linked to utopia, creating green and idyllic paradises. So let's move now from the apocalyptic landscapes of war and technology to the attempts of materializing its opposite aesthetics. From the countless examples in which the garden became a device for rendering territorial power, such as in the early Egyptian gardens depicting the expansion of the empire through exotic plants, modernity has gone hand in hand with the garden as a space where many layers of complexity intersect. It is in the 13th century, greenhouses were built in Italy to house the exotic plants from the tropics and colonies. The originally called giardini botanici were converted in the 16th and 17th centuries into medicinal gardens, preserving mainly plant species with desired properties. But the idea of a botanical garden changed to encompass the display of the beautiful, strange, new, and sometimes economically important plant trophies that returned from European conquest to other distant lands with the arrival of colonialism. Through the greenhouse, gardeners and engineers developed a technological device for cutting and pasting fragments of reality, which allowed the transfer for pre-existing cultural construction through the definition of the glass envelope and the energy systems. The image of paradise on a small scale and delocalized, a portable utopia of the ruling classes. The greenhouse, as one of the architectural products of colonialism, displayed the science of power in a fascinating exuberance of foreign plant species. It also mobilized imaginaries that would have been unattainable without these technical developments, a system of reproduction and representation of colonial fantasy. The greenhouse was the space of the Robinson Crusoe, a Westerner who dominates the world thanks to science and knowledge. What we invite you to do and to think is how instead of creating beautiful gardens, such constructions were again violently extracting and separating us from the world, in this case, the botanical realm. The technologies of the skins that made possible such consumption of the natural not only separate us from a symbiotic relation with the natural, but structures such as the Crystal Palace, which was originally erected in Hyde Park to house the Great Exhibition of 1851, became more than a utopia, a great colonial heterotopia. The Crystal Palace was the compendium of many continents extracted and delocalized. The Crystal Palace was Africa, India, Europe, and America at the same time, a schizophrenia of environments, a form of leisure and travel that continues to transform, changing the needs of tourists hungry for exotic scenery. The degree of fiction generated by the image of such spaces, tropical rainforest under the huge metal domes, seems more like a large film set than an attempt to reproduce a natural environment, and it is where the trap of simulation as a collage of landscapes lies. This structure brings the postnatural condition closer to tourism and consumption, a dystopian image that raises new questions about the conception of natural in contemporary imaginaries. Utopia, once again, has been swallowed by the capitalism system. Visitors at these spaces represent contemporary, non-geographical way of understanding the globe and its climates. Finally, we don't have to travel far to find paradise. We don't even have to imagine. We just have to pay for it. Such technification has had more to do with the colonial projects and ways to understand commercial opportunities to create wealth, productivity, or atmospheres with air-conditioned spaces than with an altruistic desire to build Edens on Earth. So from the first gardens to the infrastructures that enclose tropical landscapes, their architecture of air condition has created infinite typologies of spaces where progress, technique, and technology have been placed at the service, almost always, of power, economy, and leisure. The relationship between technology and nature from which they emerge, moving beyond the image of the Garden of Eden towards a specific technification of a space, has been central to the colonial and post-colonial history of great power states. So after this short genealogy of two separations of architectures that have insisted in the division between the interior and the exterior from a military, technological, or aesthetical interest, we have created an understanding of membranes that does not create interchange. In both extremes, from the thick walls of the bunkers to the thin membranes of the greenhouses, Western perspectives have built upon a constant separation from our companion species. So how can we shift from that to an empathic coexistence of entities? In his beautiful book, The Spell of the Sensuous, David Abram draws us into a remarkable series of investigations regarding the fluid participatory nature of perception and the reciprocity between our senses and the sensus of the more than human. Our bodies have formed themselves in delicate reciprocity with the manifold textures, sounds, and shapes of an animate earth. Our eyes have evolved in subtle interaction with other eyes, as our ears are attuned by the very structure to the howling of wolves and the honking of geese. To shut ourselves off from these other voices, to continue by our lifestyles to condemn these other sensibilities to the oblivion of extinction, is to rob our senses of their integrity and to rob our minds of their coherence. We are humans only in contact and conviviality with what is not human. Our obliviousness to non-human nature is today held... Is it okay with the time? Okay. Almost there. Our obliviousness to non-human nature is today held in place by ways of speaking that simply deny intelligence to other species and to nature in general, as well as by the very structures of our civilized existence. By incessant violences over territories, by the glass walls that trap plants and asphyxiate their ecosystems, by the electric lights that eclipse not only the stars but night itself, by an architecture that obviates any need to step outside the purely human world, we have condemned non-human nature only as it has been circumscribed by our civilization and its technologies, domesticating, separating, utilizing, colonizing, and categorizing. The story of our limits and borders is the story of a commodification of nature, reducing it to a stock of resources. How can we start thinking beyond such separation? How can we start shifting from such narratives towards desirable futures or even presents? We should dismantle all such boundaries that became walls and barriers, abandoning material and spatial agents. In his book, We Have Never Been Modern, recently passed away Bruno Latour, speaks about the capacity of modernity to make us forget. In his following beautiful exhibition, Reset Modernity, he invited artist Pierre Huyghe to reflect on the limit of the aesthetic that has separated us from the real non-human world. Analyzing again how modernity and romanticism have created a simulation of the natural, Huyghe focuses on one of the main representations of beauty. But what he does is to invite us to precisely look beyond such flattened image and immerse ourselves into the troubled waters that lie underneath. By taking water from Monet's pond, he visibilizes a complete other world of relations, of living beings, of mud and dark ecologies that lie behind the water lilies. To trespass the skin into the realm of a new sensuous, we should all include ourselves, touching, feeling, and experimenting with others. So, to finish, almost there, promoting restlessness and wonder in the face of the uncanny and speculating on new ways of relating to spaces through new imaginaries that disarticulate the binomials that the modern project has confronted us with seems the only way out of this entanglement, and so begin to present spatialities where the post-human defies utopia. In Donna Haraway's thinking, the cyborg is a central figure that encompasses a set of necessary transformation that must include technoscience, the opening up of a new education and information, and the creation of new narrative horizons outside any ethnocentric bias. In short, if we recover a vision of science as an ethical and political discourse, the cyborg will imply the creation of a new epistemological and political paradigm. The cyborg space is not innocent, is not born from the image of the Garden of Eden. It does not seek unitary identity, nor does it generate endless antagonistic duality. Linguistically and materiality, it is a hybrid of cybernetic device and organisms, but also a powerful social and scientific reality. For Haraway, it is precisely in these new cyborgs, which are neither metaphor nor materiality, that a new interconnection with other imaginaries must be constructed and developed. Analyzing the genealogies of some projects that try to materialize utopian architecture can help us to overcome the static and idealized image of the natural from that mechanistic control and to assume its failure as the basis of modern thought. Transcending such humanist thinking brings us closer to the need of embracing a cyborg perspective for a collective imaginary of desirable futures. Perhaps going against utopia means accepting the impossibility of materializing it. The cyborg is therefore a space from which we can claim new responsibilities over this immaterial world. It is not only the longed-for image from which we claim new answers, but what is already happening and which must configure new complex multi-species approaches that disarticulate the way in which science has placed the natural imaginary at the service of leisure and consumption. The cyborg is a new fusion between the natural and the mechanic, and it augurs post-humanist counter-utopias that need to take not only physical form, but manifest itself in the hypothetical forms of future coexistence and hope of worlds to come. I will tell you more about those images afterwards in the conversation. But what we invite you to do is to overcome all these barriers and walls and distances that have shaped our disconnection with the world, to unflatten that image, to create porous cyborg imaginaries and architectures that can take us to a possible postnatural reality in which everything is connected and intertwined. Thank you very much.